Imagine a country where women live almost a decade longer than men.
Right, just a massive longevity gap.
Exactly. And a country where women have these vastly superior levels of education, like they completely dominate the universities and essentially hold the intellectual keys to this thriving, ultra-modern digital economy.
Which sounds incredible on paper.
It does. You hear that, and you probably think you're looking at a complete societal flip, like a matriarchal utopia, you know?
Oh, absolutely.
But then you turn the page on the data and you realize that in this exact same country, the men are still making $13,000 more a year.
Yeah, it is the ultimate developmental paradox.
I mean, it's wild.
You have a society that has completely broken the United Nations scale for human progress in almost every biological and intellectual category, but it's still fundamentally tethered to these traditional economic disparities.
Well, welcome to the deep dive. Today we are opening up a massive, absolutely fascinating report. It's titled Leap Beyond Equilibrium: In-Depth Decoding of Estonia and Global Human Development Trajectories.
It's a heavy title, but the data inside is just mind-blowing.
It really is. And we are going to look at the raw data from 1990 all the way to 2023.
So a full 30-plus years.
Exactly. We're talking about massive global UN data sets. We are comparing the entire world against the wild, incredibly volatile, and ultimately triumphant trajectory of one Eastern European nation.
Estonia. And this isn't just about reading statistics off a page. The goal today is to really decode the mechanisms behind this reality.
Right.
We need to understand the historical shocks that forced this country to develop the way it did, because it wasn't an accident.
No, definitely not. And if you're listening to this, I want you to keep your own country's development in the back of your mind as a sort of mental benchmark.
That's a great way to look at it.
Think about your own societal expectations of progress, and then watch what happens when we apply them to the extremes of the Estonian model.
Because they really are extremes.
Yeah. The mission today is to figure out how they achieved this unprecedented reality, like what it actually feels like for the people living there on the ground.
And crucially, we need to pull back the curtain on the hidden massive costs of this high-speed development.
Right, because this kind of societal hyperdrive, it is definitely not free.
Not at all. It comes with a staggering planetary debt.
But to even understand how we get to that debt, we have to start at the foundational paradox of this report. We have to look at how they actually measure gender equality.
The baseline metrics.
Okay, let's unpack this. Usually when we talk about measuring gender equality globally, we use a scale where a perfect balance between men and women, like in health, education, and living standards, scores a 1.0.
Right, a perfectly balanced scale, 1-to-1.
Exactly. Now, the global average right now sits at roughly 0.955.
Meaning the world as a whole is not balanced.
Right. Which means, universally, the scale is tipped toward men. Men are statistically outperforming women in these core metrics of human development.
That is the global narrative we are all so familiar with.
Yeah, we are constantly trying to push that 0.95 up to a 1.0.
To reach that equilibrium.
But Estonia completely shatters this model. I mean, they aren't at 0.95. They aren't even at 1.0.
No, they've gone right past it.
Right now, they are sitting at 1.023.
Which is mathematically profound when you really think about it.
It's crazy.
What's fascinating here is that this transcendence beyond 1.0 shatters our traditional understanding of gender equality. When you cross that threshold, it means that female human development in a country is measurably, consistently higher than male human development.
They blew right past the finish line.
They absolutely did. Estonia essentially acts as this unique laboratory for multidimensional development, especially during its transition from a Soviet state to a modern economy.
And doing the research for this, the thing that really shocked me wasn't just the current number. Like, it's not just a snapshot. It's the timeline.
It's historical consistency.
Yeah. This isn't some recent post-pandemic blip. They hit global #1 on this index way back in 1995.
A score of 1.029, yeah.
And they hit it again in 1998, 1999, and reached this astonishing peak of 1.039 in 2002.
They were practically living in this statistical future while the rest of the world was just trying to figure out the present.
Well, wait a sec. I have to push back on the framing here.
Okay, go ahead.
Is it actually progress if the scale is just unequal in the opposite direction?
That is the big question.
I mean, are we just flipping the imbalance and calling it a victory?
Right.
Because a score that high means men are actively falling behind.
You're touching on the exact friction that makes this report so compelling. Is it a victory or is it a symptom of a massive systemic trauma?
Right, because of the history there.
Exactly. To answer that, we have to look at the mechanisms of the early 1990s. We have to look at the sociology of the Soviet collapse.
Which was incredibly disruptive.
Beyond disruptive. Estonia didn't reach that number because of some carefully planned feminist utopia. They reached it because of a brutal, sudden transition from a Soviet state-planned system to an independent, Wild West free market economy.
So the collapse of the Soviet Union, August 1991, Estonia restores its independence. But that means all the supply chains from Moscow are just severed overnight.
Precisely. And during that massive macroeconomic shock, the traditional societal roles and survival mechanisms just completely fractured.
How so? Like, what actually happened to the jobs?
Well, under the Soviet system, heavy industry, manufacturing, and manual labor fields that were completely dominated by men were the absolute bedrock of the economy.
Right, they were secure, state-funded jobs.
Exactly. But when independence hit, those factories shuttered practically overnight.
So the bedrock just vanishes beneath an entire generation of men.
Yes. And what we see in that massive spike in the gender development scale favoring women is not women systematically suppressing men.
It's a reaction to the shock.
It's the statistical artifact of women adapting to the shock of modernization and globalization at a fundamentally different rate.
Because they were in different industries.
Right. Women in that era often worked in administration, teaching, light services, and healthcare.
Jobs that didn't just disappear when the factories closed.
Exactly. When the new independent Estonian economy began to pivot rapidly towards services, digital infrastructure, and Western integration, those existing skills were highly transferable.
Oh, wow. So they were positioned perfectly to grab the reins of the new reality.
They had the right toolkit for the transition.
But put yourself in the shoes of someone living there. Just imagine what it culturally feels like, as a listener, to live in a society where women have statistically led human development for almost 3 entire decades.
It has to change the very fabric of the culture.
It really does. It changes how families operate, how schools are run. It changes what a child expects when they look at the adults around them.
It creates a completely different baseline expectation. I mean, a young adult in Estonia today has only ever known a reality where women are statistically the more educated, longer-living demographic.
The cultural inertia of male dominance in fundamental development just isn't there in the same way it is in the rest of the world.
Right, it's a profound psychological shift.
But to really understand how they built the society, we have to zoom out a bit.
We have to look at the overall Human Development Index, the HDI.
Exactly. We can't just look at the ratio between men and women. We have to look at the total size of the pie.
The foundational matrix.
Yeah, and the data here looks exactly like a highly volatile but ultimately triumphant stock market chart, like taking massive hits but always bouncing back higher.
It's a macroeconomic masterclass.
Walk us through those numbers.
Sure. So if you look at their overall HDI, which combines health, education, and standard of living for everyone, Estonia started in 1990 at a fairly modest level, a score of 0.738.
Which is okay, but not elite.
Right. But by 2023, they have skyrocketed into the very high tier. They hit 0.905.
And the global average right now is only 0.756.
Exactly. So they leaped far, far beyond the global average. That is a 22.6% growth over 3 decades.
They moved from the middle of the pack to the absolute global elite.
It proves that Estonia is a model of a transitional economy. They demonstrated immense systemic resilience.
But the chart isn't a smooth line going up. I mean, if you look at 1994, there is a massive crater in the data.
The overall development score actually collapsed down to 0.711.
Which perfectly reflects the trauma we were just discussing.
Yes. That drop in 1994 is the statistical manifestation of real human suffering. Hyperinflation hit hard, savings were wiped out.
I read the ruble became worthless before they introduced their own currency, the kroon.
That's right. People literally couldn't afford to heat their homes or buy basic groceries.
But then they initiate this bull run that lasts 30 years.
They completely rebuilt the system.
And they didn't just rebuild the old Soviet factories. They built a completely new machine.
The digital state.
Yeah, the Tiger Leap initiative from the mid-90s. While other post-Soviet states were trying to figure out how to restart their coal mines, the Estonian government decided to aggressively invest in computerizing every single school in the country.
That was the turning point. They recognize that as a tiny nation with virtually no natural resources,
Yeah.
their only path forward was digital.
It's brilliant.
They digitized their entire government. It's what we now know as the Estonia. They reformed their education system to focus on IT.
They essentially turned the entire country into a tech startup.
They really did. And that foundational strength explains how they bounced back so fast, even from recent shocks.
Like the pandemic.
Exactly.
Yeah.
When the 2020 and 2021 global COVID-19 pandemic hit, every country took a massive dive in development.
But Estonia shook it off.
They rebounded rapidly back to 0.902 by 2022.
The resilience of this digital system is unbelievable.
It was a testament to their infrastructure.
But to understand why the women are driving this overall HDI score up and creating that unbalanced GDI ratio, we have to break this development down into its raw biological components.
We have to talk about simply staying alive,
Yep.
the survival gap.
Right. This is where the numbers become deeply personal. We are talking about life expectancy at birth.
And globally, there is a known biological and sociological baseline.
Women generally live longer than men.
Right. Globally, in 2023, women live to about 75.9 years and men to 71.
So roughly a 4.9-year gap. That's the global benchmark.
Yes, almost 5 years.
But in Estonia, the women are living to a staggering average of 83 years old.
While the men are living to 74.9.
That is an 8.1-year lifespan gap. An 8-year canyon between men and women living in the exact same country under the same healthcare system.
It's staggering. It really is.
Now, to be fair, the Estonian men at 74.9 are still living slightly longer than the global average man.
Right. They aren't dropping dead in their 40s anymore.
But the Estonian women are living vastly longer than the global average woman. Why is there such a massive chasm? Like, what is the mechanism here?
This profound longevity advantage for women is the primary biological engine pushing Estonia's GDI over 1.0.
But why is it happening?
The mechanism goes right back to the psychological and societal shock of the 1990s we talked about.
The economic collapse.
Right. The stress of that rapid economic transition hit the male demographic incredibly hard, and the legacy of that stress is still baked into the older generations today.
Because they lost their identities as providers.
Exactly. The sudden unemployment, the loss of status, it led to massive spikes in negative lifestyle factors. We saw skyrocketing rates of cardiovascular disease driven by immense chronic stress.
And behavioral choices, I imagine.
Yes, much higher rates of alcohol consumption, tobacco use, occupational hazards in the remaining manual jobs, and a deeply ingrained cultural reluctance among men to seek preventative medical care.
There was a stoicism that became lethal.
That's a very accurate way to put it.
So the men essentially absorbed the physical and psychological blow of the economic collapse into their own bodies.
While the women, statistically, showed far greater psychological and biological resilience.
They adapted.
They adapted to the new service economies. They were far more proactive about utilizing the healthcare system. That 8.1-year gap is a profound legacy of a systemic shock.
Just picture the reality of that society for a moment. If you have an entire generation where the women are outliving their husbands by nearly a decade, you are creating a massive structurally female-dominated elderly population.
Which has huge sociological implications.
Right. It means wealth transfer at the end of life goes to women. It means community organizations, local voting blocs, and family dynamics are heavily influenced by older, resilient women.
Women who survived the collapse of an empire.
And saw the birth of a digital nation. It creates a quiet, structural matriarchy in the later stages of life.
And because they have nearly a decade more time on Earth in Estonia, the natural question becomes...
What are they doing with these years?
Exactly. How does that longevity translate into measurable human development?
Well, according to the data, they're spending a massive chunk of their lives studying.
They are.
Which brings us to the educational dimension of this report, the intellectual powerhouse. And frankly, this is where Estonia completely flips the global script.
We measure this through the mean years of schooling, or MYS.
And globally, what does that look like?
Globally in 2023, the data shows a very traditional, very frustrating imbalance. Men have an average of 9.2 years of schooling, while women lag behind at 8.4 years.
Which is the sad global norm we're constantly trying to fix.
Yes. But Estonia flips this entirely.
Women there have 13.7 years of schooling, completely surpassing the men, who are sitting at 13.3 years.
Now, both of those numbers are exceptionally high compared to the rest of the world.
Obviously.
Yeah.
But the fact that women lead in educational depth is critical. But let me play devil's advocate here for a second.
Okay.
Doesn't just spending more time in school sometimes mean you're avoiding a terrible workforce?
Yeah. What do you mean?
Like, if you graduate and can't find a job in a transitioning economy, you just go back to the university and get a master's degree to hide from the unemployment line. Is this higher educational number definitively a sign of success, or could it be a sign of an academic holding pattern?
That is a very common phenomenon in many developing nations, absolutely. But the data strongly refutes the holding pattern theory in the context of Estonia.
Why is that?
Remember the Tiger Leap initiative you brought up earlier? Estonia isn't just a transitional economy. It is a modern, highly digitized nation.
The E-state.
Right. In a system that relies on e-residency, digital governance, and international tech startups, education is the ultimate currency.
So it's not just hiding from the job market.
Not at all. It's acquiring the actual architecture required to participate in the new economy. When the manual labor jobs vanished in the 90s, the new jobs were in IT, modern services, international administration.
And the women were getting the degrees for those exact jobs.
Yes. Estonian women achieving absolute victory in educational depth provided the intellectual base for the nation's entire social transformation. They were perfectly positioned to leapfrog into the new sectors.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
So if you are listening to this, you are probably putting the pieces of the puzzle together. The women in Estonia live almost a decade longer than the men.
Right.
They are significantly better educated than the men, holding the high-level degrees required for a modern tech economy.
Also true.
So naturally, following the basic rules of logic and meritocracy, the women must be making way more money than the men, right?
You would absolutely assume so based on everything we've discussed.
But they don't.
No, they don't.
Not even close. Let's look at the economic reality check here. The wealth glass ceiling.
It's a jarring contradiction.
First off, just to set the stage, Estonia's overall wealth growth is a miracle. We're looking at gross national income per capita. They went from a low of $11,044 in 1993 to $40,880 in 2023.
Nearly a 4 times growth. They're a rich country now.
But when we look at the 2023 gender breakdown of that wealth, a massive crater appears. The average GNI for women is $34,598.
While the men's GNI is $47,824.
It is a $13,000 gap.
Yes.
The men are making vastly more money despite dying younger and having less education. How does that make any sense? Explain the mechanism to me.
What you are looking at is the final frontier of their gender development. Income is the only dimension of the HDI where Estonian men still hold a significant lead.
The only dimension.
The only one. And mathematically, this economic disparity acts as the great counterbalancing force for their entire society.
Counterbalancing, what do you mean by that?
Think back to that Gender Development Index score of 1.023 we started with.
Okay.
If Estonian women had income parity, if they were making that same $47,000 as the men, on top of their massive life expectancy and their superior education, that index wouldn't just be 1.023.
Oh, it would completely fly off the charts.
Exactly. It hit 1.1 or 1.2. The mathematical weight of their health and education advantages is so heavy that the wealth glass ceiling is literally the only thing keeping the country's statistics relatively close to the global norm.
That is deeply frustrating. I mean, we have this massive friction between educational supremacy and economic reality.
It reveals a lot about systemic structures.
Why does this wealth gap persist in a country that is clearly so incredibly advanced? If the women have the degrees, why don't they have the cash?
It shows that even in a highly developed society, where women are statistically more developed, systemic workplace dynamics or industry choice gender divides still cap financial equity.
Industry choice divides, you mean they are picking different jobs?
Precisely. Even highly educated women in Estonia are statistically far more likely to go into education, healthcare, and public administration.
Essential jobs.
Absolutely vital to the survival of the state, but they historically pay significantly less than the private sector.
While the men, even with slightly less overall education, are dominating the high-yield private sectors.
The tech startups, engineering, corporate leadership.
So they are dominating the executive tiers of the very companies that the education system feeds.
Exactly. And furthermore, You still have the systemic reality of the motherhood penalty.
Even in Europe.
Even there, Estonia actually has incredibly generous parental leave policies,
Yeah.
some of the best in the world. But taking a year or 18 months out of the workforce, even when legally protected, still impacts long-term earning potential,
Because you miss out on network building and career trajectory.
especially in a fast-moving tech economy. And that is a penalty that affects the men's income trajectory far less.
So you have this fascinating, almost tragic paradox. Women hold the intellectual capital, they hold the longevity capital, but men still tightly grip the financial capital.
It's a sobering reality check.
It's like the women designed and built an incredibly sleek, modern, smart house, but the men still hold the actual deed to the property.
That's a great analogy.
But I want to make sure we don't lose sight of the profound victories Estonia has achieved on the structural level. Because despite that persistent income gap, Estonia has worked aggressively to clear away structural, life-threatening biases against women.
This is where we shift our focus to the Gender Inequality Index, or GII.
Right, because GII is an entirely different metric that measures loss. It measures how much human potential a country just throws away because of reproductive health issues, lack of empowerment, and extreme labor imbalances.
And a score of 0 on this index means perfect equality. No human potential is lost.
And the global average right now is a massive 0.455.
Meaning the world is losing almost half of its potential female development to systemic structural inequality.
But Estonia, their score is a tiny 0.061. They rank 23rd globally,
Their inequality is a mere 13% of the global average.
which is phenomenal. Let's look at the physical mechanisms of this. Let's talk about life-saving health, specifically maternal mortality.
The maternal mortality ratio, or MMR.
Right. How many women die from pregnancy-related causes? In 1990, Estonia's rate was around 42 deaths per 100,000 births.
But today,
Today, it has plummeted to just 5.2.
5.2. That is world-class healthcare.
Just to put that in perspective for the listener, the global average today is still sitting at an appalling 216 deaths.
It's a night and day difference.
And look at the adolescent birth rate, teen pregnancy. The global average is 39.1 births per 1,000 young women.
And Estonia's rate is remarkably low at just 5.6.
If we connect this to the bigger picture.
Well, if we connect this to the bigger picture,
Yeah.
you see how world-class healthcare, reproductive rights, and health education literally free up women's life potential.
It's the absolute prerequisite for progress.
You cannot have high human development if your population is bogged down by maternal mortality and teen pregnancy.
Exactly. I want you, the listener, to really reflect on the physical reality of those numbers for a second. Think about how foundational, basic physical safety and healthcare are to unlocking everything else we've discussed so far.
The education, the lifespan, the wealth.
You cannot have a society where women are getting almost 14 years of advanced schooling if your teenage girls are having babies at a global average rate.
It stops the leakage of human potential at the source.
Smashing the glass ceiling in the corporate boardroom is completely irrelevant if you haven't first smashed the life-threatening biases in the delivery room.
Which perfectly sets up the next phase of development. Because when you survive and you are highly educated, you eventually demand a seat at the table.
It becomes about power and participation.
Right, in the parliament and the workplace. Let's look in the national parliament. In 1990, women held about 10.89% of the seats.
Barely 10%.
But by 2023, that number more than doubled to 26.54%.
So over a quarter of the parliament. It's not 50-50 yet, but the trajectory is undeniable.
And female labor force participation is incredibly strong at 62%.
Which far outpaces the global average of 48.5%.
This represents a qualitative shift. It's not just about health and school anymore. It's about holding the levers of political and economic power.
Right. So we've painted a picture of a rapidly growing, highly educated, gender-progressive society.
A very successful model.
But I always have this lingering skepticism when I see incredibly high national averages. Does this wealth and health apply to everyone in Estonia or just the elites?
You're asking if the averages are hiding inequity.
Yeah, because you can have a massive GDP, but if it's just a few tech billionaires in Tallinn while everyone else struggles, it's an illusion.
That is where the inequality-adjusted HDI comes in, the IHDI.
The lie detector test for development.
Exactly. It measures how fairly development is distributed, and it penalizes a country's score based on inequality. Globally, the world loses 21.95% of its human development score due to vast inequalities between the rich and the poor.
More than a fifth of human progress globally is just erased.
But Estonia loses only 7.07% to inequality.
Wow, 7% versus almost 22% globally.
Social equity acts as Estonia's development stabilizer. It proves that their HDI isn't just an illusion created by a few billionaires. It is a genuinely high standard of living across the board.
And so what does this all mean?
Well, it means they've succeeded on a structural level.
Let me summarize this. Estonia seems like a perfect utopia. Great health, long lives, educated women, low inequality. But there is a massive hidden mask that we are about to pull off.
The hidden debt.
Yes. Because you don't build an entirely new digital society from the ashes of the Soviet Union without burning a lot of fuel. Let's talk about the planetary pressures adjusted HDI, or the PHDI.
When environmental impact is factored in, the picture changes dramatically.
What happens to their elite ranking?
Their global ranking crashes, plummeted by 23 places.
23 places.
Yes, their beautiful 0.905 HDI collapses to a PHDI of 0.714.
That is a staggering 21.1% loss of their development score.
And just for context, the global average loss, when this filter is applied, is only 10.1%.
So they are taking a hit more than double the global average.
Let's look at the physical receipts. Per capita CO2 emissions. The global average is 4.54 tons.
And Estonia?
Estonia emits 7.57 tons.
Nearly double, but the material footprint is what really blew my mind.
Right, the measure of raw materials extracted from the earth.
The global average is 12.71 tons of material per person. Estonians consume 29.12 tons of material per person.
Estonia is using 2.3 times the global average.
It's like finding out the Strata valedictorian has been financing their amazing, successful life with high-interest credit cards.
Right.
Except the credit card they maxed out belongs to the Earth.
This raises an important question. What we are seeing here is the dark side of this development.
The heavy planetary burden.
Exactly. High human development is currently inextricably coupled with a heavy planetary burden. The price of prosperity is incredibly steep.
They built a digital paradise, but it's running on a really dirty engine. Which brings us to the final 2023 scorecard summary for this deep dive. Let's recap the radar chart.
Yeah.
Estonia crushes the global average in HDI, beating it by 19.7%.
They dominate the GDI by 7.1%.
Their GII and IHDI are exceptionally strong, losing only a fraction of what the rest of the world loses to inequity.
But they fail spectacularly on planetary pressures.
Taking a loss that is 10.9% worse than the global average.
Estonia's story is the ultimate proof that gender equality and social equity act as powerful accelerators for human development.
They are the blueprint for societal transition.
However, the future challenge for Estonia and the world is breaking the link between high development and high pollution. The next step has to be a survival-level leap to harmonize with the planet.
Which brings me back to the very beginning. We talked about how much we like perfectly balanced scales and clear metrics of success. But after looking at this massive mountain of data, I have to leave you with this final thought.
It's a big one.
If perfect social equality and sky-high education seem to inherently require consuming 3 times more of the Earth's resources to sustain, are we defining human development all wrong? Is it possible to build a society that is perfectly equitable, deeply educated, but completely invisible to the environment? Think about that the next time you look at a graph of human progress. Until next time.